I'm sure that our first speaker for this morning, not this afternoon yet, needs no introduction to people in the room, Professor Sharynne McLeod. Sharynne is a Professor of Speech and Language Acquisition at Charles Sturt University and is a life member of Speech Pathology Australia. Sharynne's research focuses on monolingual and multilingual children's speech acquisition. Her research foregrounds the right of everyone, particularly children, to participate fully in society. Sharynne is going to talk briefly about the special edition of the International Journal of Speech Language Pathology, for which she was a guest editor.
Good morning, everybody. As you know, this year is the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In 1948, when the world was reeling from the horrors of World War II, something good happened, and people came together, led by Eleanor Roosevelt, to develop the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 30 statements that have guided our world ever since. In terms of speech pathologists, Article 19 of 30, sitting in the middle, is an article that is so important to what we do every day. Let me read it to you. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. Speech pathologists are very good at breaking down frontiers, and that's something that we've been doing. Now, we have done this. Speech Pathology Australia has led the world in celebrating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights anniversary. In fact, to date, we know of no other association that's taken on board any of the other articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to write a special issue. We have done it here in Australia. The first issue of the International Journal of Speech Language Pathology celebrates this important milestone in the world with 31 papers addressing communication as a human right. Taylor and Francis have seen this as such an important milestone that they have made every single one of these papers free, and we also have many free issues of the journal that I'd really encourage you, if you've got one already, to give one to somebody who's not a speech pathologist, to think about human rights. I'll show you why people who aren't speech pathologists might like to read it in a minute. So, let me tell you a little bit about this special issue. The Australian Human Rights Commissioner and the Disability Discrimination Commissioner for Australia have been so enthusiastic that they wanted to write the foreword and have been facilitative in us working towards presenting this at a side event at the United Nations. Gaynor yesterday, our president, quoted from this introduction, and if ever you need to quote something amazing about why we do what we do, this foreword is so helpful. It says, "The right to freedom of expression and opinion is like air, food and water. We take it for granted till it's denied of us. And as speech pathologists, we see so many people who this opportunity is denied, and that's really our life's work." The special issue contains papers that break frontiers. If I just start at the countries, starting with R, we have a paper from Rwanda, and the people who've written that paper right now are doing that work in Rwanda, sponsored by a Speech Pathology Australia grant. We've got papers from Saudi Arabia, Shetland, the Shetland Islands, South Africa, Sweden, Syria, UK and USA. So even at the end of the alphabet, there's some frontiers that are broken that many journals don't publish from some of those countries. We have many different perspectives, and you'll notice at the front we have papers on terrorism and media, the law, and so forth. We've also got, regardless of frontiers, this special issue contains poetry. It contains reviews and many invited commentaries, so it's a little bit different from a normal journal issue, but it also does contain research papers as well. The first paper after the foreword in the special issue, I've compiled and summarised sort of key points from all the articles and have categorised what we've done into thinking about communication rights for all people, people with communication disability, for children and people who speak non-dominant languages. And oftentimes as speech pathologists, and certainly in my work, I work with people who cross all those boundaries, which is even more challenging. Declan Murphy, a young man with Down syndrome, has written one of the early papers, and we worked with the typesetters and copy editors to not change his words. He wanted his words as he had written them, and I'm really appreciative to Taylor and Francis for not changing his words and for having them as he's written them. And then Rena Lyons and her team. Rena won the IJSLP Journal Editors Award last night for another paper. They have worked with Declan to unpack some of the rights issues of his work in citizenship and politics in Ireland. Rosie Martin, who was the Tasmanian Australian of the Year, has written about her work in prisons with her Just Sentences program. The International Communication Project in this paper was led by our very own Gail Mulcair and Corrie Williams, with Arlene Pietrangelo from ASHA, from the American Speech Language Hearing Association. And here are all the members of the 6 associations across the world in Los Angeles, all talking about our special issue. Speech Pathology Australia, you should be proud. We also cover the issue of being able to order your own cup of coffee. And this crowd from Ireland have talked about how they work with waitresses and baristas and wait staff to enable people with complex communication needs to actually order their own food, and the impact that that can have, the right to order your own cup of coffee. As I said, Julie Marshall and Helen and Barrett are right now in Rwanda working on this important project that has also the United Nations backing. They're working on the human rights of refugee survivors of sexual and gender-based violence with communication disability. Their work has shown that you're more likely to experience sexual and gender-based violence if you have a communication disability because you can't speak out against your perpetrators. Important work that sometimes doesn't necessarily cross what we do in our day-to-day practice, but helps us think about the breadth of communication rights. Bronwyn Hemsley and her team have a paper talking about using Twitter to access the human right for people who use AAC, and how you don't have a communication disability on Twitter. You are a person that can have views like anybody else. Deborah Jones and Lindy McAllister and David Lyle have written about their work in Broken Hill and how to come up with localised solutions to complex disadvantages and inequities. They talk about provision of civically engaged, accessible, acceptable and sustainable speech-language pathology services in their work with the University of Sydney speech pathology students in Broken Hill, and I had the honour of meeting them last year. Deborah Hirsch has written, this sentence just gives me goosebumps when I read it, about the work being done across the world, and many of which is being led by people in Australia, such as Linda Worrell's team, and I can't mention the number of amazing people who work in the field of aphasia in our country. But this quote kind of captures some of the issues and the human rights of people with aphasia. Aphasia can rob people of their freedom of expression at a fundamental level, threatening their identity and disrupting their ability to demonstrate competence, share experience and participate in life as before. Suzanne Hoff has done amazing work developing the communication specialists and resources in Fiji, and she writes about communication capacity research that can be applied to other majority world countries as well. Aoife Gallagher and Hayley Tancredi have a great paper on advancing the human rights of children with communication needs in schools, and thinking, when you're working in schools, about thinking about children's rights in school and the rights of children who have difficulty communicating. Jane McCormack, Elise Baker and Kate Crowe have analysed data from the Australian Government Senate inquiry from 2014 and have looked at how we can listen to the life stories of people with a history of childhood communication disorder. Jane and Elise will be presenting this paper on Wednesday afternoon, and it's quite powerful, as you can read from the quote, just some of the issues that were raised and that they've talked about. And the Australian Association of Research in Education published a blog yesterday about this work that's received a lot of social media attention just yesterday. Christine De Luca was the Poet Laureate in Edinburgh, and she is passionate about preserving mother tongue. She's from the Shetland Islands above Scotland, and it's been such a privilege to liaise with her to ensure that her poetry about preserving mother tongue is maintained, and we've been able to publish that in this special issue. She's written it in Shetlandic and in English, and it's very beautiful, and that's part of our Regardless of Frontiers for the special issue. And the final paper that I'm going to just share with you, hopefully you've got a taste of what's in it, is the paper that Bea Staley has written with her colleague Leonard Freeman about the positioning of Aboriginal students in their languages within Australia's education system. It's a very interesting historical account about how we think about language use with Aboriginal and Indigenous children in Australia. A really powerful paper. Speech Pathology Australia has had a long commitment to communication rights, and in fact right now they have a website about communication rights that is called Speak Up for Communication Rights, and we've developed a hashtag to go along with the UN's Stand Up for Human Rights. We've got a hashtag Speak Up for Communication Rights, or ComRights, that's been used widely. Please use it. So just to conclude before we have our photograph, I really want you to read that special issue. It's the sort of papers that you can dip into, most of them are quite short, and really challenge yourself to think, oh my goodness, let me think about those people in Rwanda. How can I use that thinking of communication rights in my own practice, in my own thinking about assessment and intervention? Share a free copy of the special issue. We have a few hundred here, and if you need more, you can contact Speech Pathology Australia with people outside your discipline. Next month, I'm talking to a group of lawyers about this special issue. It's very, very interesting to people in the media, in law and other parts who are really keen about thinking of the human right to communicate. Follow the United Nations and the work that they're doing, particularly for this 70th anniversary, and please use these Twitter hashtags if you're on Twitter. And in my paper, I talked about how just the fact of acknowledging that people exist, adjusting your communication style and taking time to listen is the most fundamental way that you can support communication rights. So now, I think my 10 minutes is up.